Part 3, Section 8, Crisis at Christmas. Lynn News, it's Christmas! To get your Christmas season started, we're excited to announce our 12 Days of Christmas Countdown giveaway. Day 6. Today, you can win a Christmas meal for yourself and up to 5 friends at the Jolly Anchor. A full 3-course meal is included, together with a pint or bottle of beer or a glass of wine per person. Another Christmas season came around, and the kitchen was fully utilised and started to show a real profit for the first time. In early December, George had been out walking when he slipped and cracked a bone in his leg, so I started to visit him at the cottage for our weekly updates. A couple of days before Christmas, I drove up as normal and was getting my pile of papers together. My mind was full of how busy we were going to be that evening and how many bookings we had. I was vaguely aware that someone was walking along the lane towards me, but I would probably have just gone in to see George if she hadn't spoken. "Well, look who's here," a familiar voice called. "And wearing a beautiful leather jacket too. I wonder where you found the money to buy that." I spun around, nearly dropping my papers in the mud, and there before me was Maggie, smiling from ear to ear. "Maggie," I stammered, "what are you doing here? I mean, great to see you. You look fantastic. What are you doing here?" She laughed. "Nice to see you too." I smiled as best I could after the shock and kissed her on the cheek. It was only then I noticed the small child holding on to Maggie's hand. "And who is this?" I asked. Without being prompted, the boy replied, "My name is Tony and I'm 7 1/4. "Isn't that a coincidence?" I said. "My name's Tony too, but I'm a little bit older than 7 1/4. I held up my hand for the young man, who shook it gravely. I was aware that George had been standing by his door watching this little exchange, so I excused myself. Maggie invited me over for tea when I completed my business. Her smile faltered a bit at that point, and maybe she blushed just a little. As for myself, I could not stop from remembering all those times we had had tea together. I hurried in to see George, who was amazed I knew his neighbour. I reminded him that it was a small community and you got to know lots of people. "But I didn't know she was still here in the cottage," I said. "Oh yes," he replied. "Apparently Maggie got the cottage as part of the divorce settlement. Quite messy as I understand it. Her husband had been having an affair, and when she found out, well, I don't know the details, but there was something about another man being involved. But enough of that. Let's look at the books, and you can get back to the pub. You must be run off your feet." I tried to look interested, but I was doing a bit of mathematics. Tony was 7 1/4. Add 9 months to that makes 8 years, and 8 years ago, Maggie and I were having tea several times a day. "Are you okay?" George suddenly asked. "You look a bit white." "Oh, yes, I'm fine," I said. "Just working hard, you know. What were you saying about monthly returns?" When we finished looking at the books, I told Maggie I'd go over for a cup of tea. I said to George, "But it's time I should be getting back to the Anchor. If you see her, tell her I'm sorry, and maybe we can do it another time." He said he would certainly do that, and I got back into the car and tried to be as quiet as possible as I drove away. Why would she name her child Tony? Her 7 1/4-year-old child. There was only one reason I could think of. Tony was mine. I was sick to the stomach thinking about it, and my mind veered between extremes. At one moment I thought how hard this must have been on Maggie, bringing up a child alone and never knowing its father. But then my mind revolted at the very idea of being a dad. I couldn't do that. I couldn't take the responsibility. And why had she come back to the cottage? Why had she invited me in? Did she want me to pay maintenance? Did she expect me to be involved in the raising of the kid? I almost crashed the car several times before I got back to the Anchor, and then I sat for a long time just wondering what to do. Noise from the bar eventually roused me from my thoughts, and I reluctantly went in and put on my happy face for the punters. There was no lock-in that evening, and there was some grumbling from the locals, but I was just not in the mood. I closed up and was making my way to my room when I spotted Ruby in the kitchen boiling a kettle. "You want tea?" she asked. "Always starts with tea, doesn't it?" I replied, more to myself than anything else. Ruby looked at me strangely. "You've not been yourself since you got back from George's. What's up? You can't be giving you grief about the pub. We're doing great." I sat down at the table, and much as I tried to hold them back, tears started to flow. Ruby sat next to me and took my hand, and suddenly I found myself telling her everything. I mean everything. I'm always good at the half-truth, but this time I told her the whole truth. I told her about the release I got from dangerous fast driving, admitting the real circumstances behind my car accident. I told her about all the meaningless women I'd had over the years. Then I told her about Maggie, and about how the child just had to be mine. I was cried out and talked out, and Ruby Sale sat with me. At last she said, "Well, it's time we went to bed. Let me think about what you told me, and we can talk again in the morning." In my room I fell into a deep, almost comatose sleep. When I woke I was shocked to see it was already 10 o'clock. I rushed to get dressed and found that Mulkey and Karen were already started the early morning routine and had Lucy with them. I asked after Ruby, to be told that she had gone out earlier. "It was sweet of you to lend her your car," Karen said. I tried not to show my shock. I never gave my car to anyone, but I was sure that Ruby had a good reason to use it. It was late afternoon when Ruby came back in, and the pub was already busy, so we didn't get a chance to talk. Midway through the evening it quieted off a bit, and I let the staff run the bar. I went up to Ruby's room and knocked at the door. After a moment Ruby answered, then stood aside to let me in. "Ruby's asleep, so it should be okay to talk for a while," Ruby told me as she showed me to a chair. "You said we might talk again today," I said, "and I'm assuming it has something to do with why you borrowed the car." "I didn't think you'd mind given the circumstances," she said. "I went over to see your Maggie." I didn't know if she was expecting a response or not, but I just sat there waiting for her to continue. After a pause she did so. "The good news is that Maggie hasn't had a child, either yours or anyone else's." "But I saw him," I exclaimed. "I even shook his hand." "Well, you're off the hook on that one," Ruby went on. "Maggie is looking after her nephew while her sister has a break. I had a long chat with Maggie. She really is a beautiful person, you know. At first she was mortified to think you'd assumed Tony was your child, but after a while we both had a good laugh about it." "Well, I'm glad you found it amusing," I said. "We did," Ruby smiled, but it seemed to be only her lips smiling, not her eyes. And then I decided that since I was out in your car, I'd go over and talk to Betty. "Betty and I used to be great friends, but when she took up with you, I dropped her, I'm afraid." I sat in silence. There didn't visit anything I could say. "You know, Tony, you're a great talker, a wonderful storyteller, and you know how to run an excellent pub, but you make a lousy boyfriend. You had me, that loved you more than earth itself, and you couldn't keep your pants on long enough to notice. You had a great thing going with Betty from what she tells me, but you gave it up for some rebound sex with an older woman. And you had who knows how many other girls, but when you thought that Maggie had your child, your reaction was to run away. I've come to a decision, Tony. I was starting to think that maybe there could be something between us again, that we could be more than just good friends, but I realise now that would just be me fooling myself. You are who you are, and you will never change. I'll be gone from here tomorrow morning. Betty has said I can move in with her if I wanted. She has lots of room, and I can help her run the boarding house, at least until I get myself back on my feet. So I think that's what I'll be. Not that I expect you to call on me or anything. In fact, I think it would be better if you didn't. It's undeniable that there is a chemistry between us, and if we were different people, maybe there could be a future for us. But me thinking I could live and work here was a mistake, although perhaps I needed to do so to get you out of my mind once and for all. Don't think I hate you, Tony. Please don't think that. It's just that, well, we want different things. You'll always have a place in my heart, just not in my bed. Well, I expect you need to get back and down to the bar. I'm sure the customers would love to see your smiling face. I got up without a word and started to leave. As I got to the door, I turned to look at Ruby, trying to think of something to say to make it okay, but she had her back to me. I closed the door behind me and went back down to the bar. You better believe we had a lock-in that night, and the party went on day and night for weeks.